Welcome to the Diabetes Podcast, where real stories meet real science, helping you take charge, not just take medicine. Today we're diving into one of the most searched topics in diabetes, neuropathy. In this episode, we're breaking down the types of neuropathy in diabetes, what causes nerve damage, how it progresses, what it feels like emotionally and physically, the treatments available, and the lifestyle and nutrition strategies that can help people feel better. If you're listening to this right now and you're dealing with burning feet at night, numb toes, those electric shock sensations, or you're tired of being told that's just how diabetes is, I want you to know there is real evidence that stabilizing blood sugars, improving metabolic health, and addressing the underlying causes can reduce neuropathy progression and in early stages, sometimes even improve it. This episode isn't about fear, it's about clarity, understanding, and actual solutions. Let's go. Hello and welcome to the Diabetes Podcast. I'm Richie.
I'm Amber.
And Amber, today's episode reminds me of our interview with our buddy Wayne Walker of the Trouble Afoot podcast and his story of how he stepped on an electrical plug in his garage. It went through the sole of his foot, and yet he described it as feeling like he had stepped on a leaf.
I know. As incredible as that sounds, like the difference between stepping on an electrical plug or a flat leaf is just astounding. But that's really diabetic neuropathy showing rearing its ugly head. And in that interview, we did talk about how this incident happened years before his diagnosis with Charcot-Foot in the setting of diabetes. So let's really get into it and talk about it. Let's start where we normally start, which is the normal physiology of the nerve. So how the nerves should work before diabetes disrupts the system. The main reason we want to talk about this is because understanding normal nerve physiology can give you the power to better understand neuropathy, which is literally translated as nerve pain, which is really interesting given some other things that we're going to talk about today. But a nerve may be visualized as an electric cable. It has a wire, which is in the nerve, the axon, a protective coating called the myelin sheath, and tiny blood vessels that keep it alive. And these nerves do pretty much everything. They tell your feet to move. They help you feel the floor underneath your feet. They regulate digestion, control your heart rate, and manage sexual function. And healthy nerves need an oxygen supply, a consistent energy supply, mostly glucose, healthy blood flow, an environment of low inflammation, and this also means a stable metabolic environment.
So when somebody develops neuropathy, it's not just the nerves that are the problem, it's also the blood supply getting to the nerves as well.
Yep.
Okay.
And that can maybe sound surprising, but neuropathy is not just nerve damage. And by that, I mean it's actually the result of several systems in the body that are struggling. So I'm going to attempt to break these down in a way that actually makes some sense. So first and foremost, it is a vascular problem. And vascular simply means your circulatory system, your heart, your blood vessels, and the tiny microscopic blood vessels called your capillaries. And these tiny capillaries are what bring oxygen and nutrients to the nerves. So if the blood sugar stays high, these little vessels can stiffen. Now, I know we talked about like normal physiology, but let's just go there about what could happen. They can get stiff, narrow, or damaged, and that creates an environment where the nerves don't get the blood flow that they need. So neuropathy is partly a circulation problem that is affecting the nerves. Secondly, neuropathy is a metabolic problem. So when I say metabolic, I'm referring to the way that your body uses and processes glucose, which comes from carbohydrate energy, insulin, and nutrients. When blood sugars swing high and low, like when they take that roller coaster ride up and down all day long, it stresses the entire metabolic system. And that stress directly affects your nerves. So neuropathy is part of a blood sugar management issue caused by metabolic overload. Third, it's a mitochondrial energy problem. So mitochondria are the little power plants inside your cells that make energy. And when glucose levels stay elevated, or conversely, when they roller coaster ride up and down, the mitochondria in your nerve cells struggle to function. So they sort of produce less clean energy and more exhaust. If you think of the smokestacks coming off of an industrial factory, and we call this oxidative stress. I say we call it, like the royal we call it. Right. We call it oxidative stress. So if the nerves don't get enough energy, they could misfire, go numb, burn or sting, or just stop sending signals altogether. So neuropathy is partly a power supply problem inside the nerve cell itself. And then lastly, it's an inflammatory problem. So for those of you who listened to the episode on inflammation, or maybe you already know this, inflammation is not always bad. In fact, acute inflammation, like maybe you accidentally hit your finger with a hammer, or you're fighting off a smaller infection, that acute inflammation reaction is what helps us heal from injuries. But chronic inflammation, the kind that stays on, like a light switch left on all the time, it damages tissues. And high glucose increases these inflammatory chemicals in the bloodstream. Over time, these chemicals attack the nerves and the small vessels, those capillaries that feed them. So neuropathy is partly also an inflammation problem driven by chronic metabolic stress. Whew. So I'm going to put it all together. It's not just one problem. It's this perfect storm of poor nerve flow, metabolic stress, reduced energy production, and inflammation. And the most important part is that each of those problems can improve when blood sugars stabilize. And that's why we talk remission, and that's why we talk about improving management of the blood sugars and diabetes health overall, because it matters so much. And it's not about being perfect and getting everything exactly right. It's about reducing the stress on your body, on your nerves, so that the nervous system can function better.
So what's actually happening in diabetic neuropathy?
Yeah. Well, firstly, I think it's important to understand that there are 4 different types of neuropathies in diabetes. I know, as if it's not bad enough. So first, there is peripheral neuropathy, which is the most common type, affecting about 90% of all cases of diabetic neuropathy. They fall into this peripheral neuropathy category. And the word peripheral simply means the outer parts of your body, the places furthest from the brain and spinal cord. So we're talking about your toes, your feet, your calves, your fingers, your hands. Those nerves are the most vulnerable because they're the longest nerve fibers in the body. They've got the farthest distance to travel. And while they're the farthest to travel, they also have the smallest blood vessels feeding them, which means they're the first to suffer when blood sugar is high or when circulation is compromised. And people with diabetes who have this peripheral neuropathy, common things that they'll say will be like, I have this burning or tingling in my hands and feet. Or they might describe that it feels like either numbness or walking on pins and needles. It could feel like sharp electric zaps, feeling like you're walking on pebbles, or it could also feel like this sensation that your socks are bunched up under your shoe, but they're not, like which irritates the snot out of me when my snots do that, when my socks do that. But that's peripheral neuropathy, which is the majority of all diabetic neuropathies. Second is this autonomic neuropathy. So this type of neuropathy affects the nerves that you don't consciously control. So those that run your heart, your blood pressure. And when I say heart, I mean more like your heart rate. You don't really control how many beats per minute your heart goes. Thank goodness, because I would probably forget, and that would be a very bad thing. But it affects digestion, bladder control, and sexual function. So when these nerves are damaged, this is when people might say they've been diagnosed with gastroparesis. And that would be diagnosable by having a gastric emptying study where they measure how long it takes food to empty the stomach. So if it takes more than about 30 minutes, then you would be diagnosed with this gastroparesis, which is a paralysis of the stomach because of the nerves feeding in there. So this digestive slowing, which could also cause nausea or constipation. People feeling lightheaded when standing. They might notice bladder problems other than like frequent urination, which is just in and of itself a symptom of high blood sugar. So that's the body trying to compensate and flush out excess sugars by frequent urination, getting that out. Autonomic dysfunction could manifest as erectile dysfunction or vaginal dryness, and could also be noticed in like changes in your sweat, meaning like you're sweating for no reason, or not sweating when maybe you should be. So it's less common than peripheral neuropathy, but it's incredibly impactful because it affects everyday automatic body functions. And then there are two more, and these are more rare, but they do occur. And one is proximal neuropathy. This could show up as a sudden pain or weakness in the hips, the thighs, or the butt. And people often would describe this as difficulty getting up from a chair, trouble climbing stairs, sudden weakness in the leg, and usually it's more unilateral, meaning it's affecting one side of the body more, and can be frightening because it comes on pretty quickly. And the good news is, though, many people do improve well over time with supportive care and controlling blood sugars better, like all of these really. And then the last one, the most rare of the neuropathies would be focal neuropathy, which can happen when a specific individual nerve is affected. And that means the symptoms are going to come on suddenly and often in one spot. And it's usually affecting the face, the hand, the leg, sometimes even the eyes. And it causes this sudden pain or weakness, like having trouble focusing the eyes or weakness in the wrist. But those usually are a little more acute and improve once blood sugars stabilize. But what I think is important to note out of all of these things is when people feel this pain, it's real physiologically because the nerves are actually misfiring, and that neuropathy in particular can affect strength, balance, and coordination, making walking or even standing uncomfortable or scary for that person.
So what is the main cause of the damage to the nerves? Is it just the high blood sugars?
It is the high blood sugars, and it's very much about that blood sugar instability. So when blood sugars spike repeatedly, and I don't mean like emergency room numbers like 400, 500, 600, 800. I'm talking about like everyday spikes above the usual range, because then the body starts reacting in ways that can slowly, over time, injure the nerves. So, okay, let's walk through the biggest causes. I think that will make it make a little more sense. So high glucose can create more free radicals, which are these tiny unstable molecules that damage cells the way that oxidation might damage a bicycle left out in the rain. And this is called oxidative stress, and it could be thought of kind of as if it were rust inside the body, because over time that rusting effect irritates and injures nerve fibers. And secondly, when those glucoses stay high across time, the body releases inflammatory chemicals, which is like the immune system's 5-alarm fire molecules. They're helpful in small bursts acutely, but when they stay elevated all the time, they start damaging the nerves, the insulation, that myelin sheath around the nerves, and the tiny blood vessels, those capillaries feeding the nerves, and it becomes a constant background irritation that the nerves can't escape, and that is inflammation.
And that's really affecting the entire nerve system, like all aspects of that, of that nerve. Okay.
And, we talked about, I talked about the mitochondria earlier, the little power plants inside every cell. Inside every cell includes nerve cells, and they make clean, usable energy, but high glucose can overwhelm them, and they start producing more of those smokestacks, if you will, more exhaust and less clean energy. And the problem with a nerve not having enough energy is that it can fire more slowly, or it misfires, or it stops firing altogether. And we did kind of speak about that a little bit earlier. But that's where the numbness and the weakness and those sudden like zaps of pain can come from. And your nerves rely on those tiny capillaries for oxygen and nutrients. So blood sugar swings can stiffen and narrow these vessels, and that's how it can injure the capillaries. It creates what is called microvascular damage. And we've talked before about how microvascular damage can show up 6 years prior to a diagnosis of type 2 diabetes. And it starts with less blood flow, which leads to less oxygen, which then leads to less healing, which leads to more damage of the nerves. So when glucose can't get into the cells effectively and efficiently, your body can divert it into a backup pathway for energy. And this backup pathway is called the sorbitol pathway.
So is this alternate route to get energy into the nerve cells? Is this kind of like the GLUT4 pathway in our muscles to get the sugar out of the bloodstream and into the muscle cells?
I love that you're thinking about this. That's so cool. But no, unlike the GLUT4 system, there's a problem with this pathway, because this pathway pulls water into the nerve and makes the nerve swell. And a swollen nerve means an irritated nerve, which means a painful nerve. And the swelling can also damage that myelin sheath, that insulated coating. And when you don't have that same insulation, it interferes with the nerve signaling, and it can really slow down those signals. So all of this inflammation, oxidative stress, sorbitol buildup causes the nerve to literally swell inside a tight space. If you think of like a big fat finger in a ring that's too small. And that pressure leads to pain, burning, tingling, numbness, and sometimes a weakness of the muscles that those nerves are communicating with, So that nerve becomes less oxygenated, which means it can't repair itself. It's less insulated, which makes the signals weak or slow down, makes them slower. There's a weaker sensation, and someone could have poor balance, weaker sensation under the feet, the nerves become more irritated, which creates this burning, tingling, stinging in the hands and feet, and more painful, like electric shocks and stabbing type feelings.
So it isn't just high blood sugars hurting nerves. It's really high blood sugars hurt the entire nerve system, the nerve itself, the sheathing, and the vasculature supporting that nervous system.
Yeah. And neuropathy happens because this environment around the nerve becomes toxic and stressed and inflamed and low oxygen. Mm-hmm. So I don't want to say all that without having a part that gives people hope, because when you improve the stability of the glucose, less highs, less lows, or less high highs, less low lows, this entire nerve environment can improve. And it's like the opposite occurs. Inflammation goes down, oxidative stress goes down, blood flow improves, energy production improves, and nerves can function better. And in many cases, dramatically better.
Okay. So when people say that they feel like their feet are on fire, it's literally because they're getting signals from their feet that are not accurate signals, but their feet are telling them that it's on fire.
Yeah, I mean the pain that's real. The burning is real. The tingling, stabbing, like all those sensations are real. And unfortunately, people with diabetic neuropathy rarely hear that pain happens because the nerve is injured, and not because the person is being weak or dramatic or overly anxious. So I'm just going to say it again, that pain is not psychological. Your nerve fibers are sending faulty signals. And in the case of neuropathy, perception is actual reality. So I want to take a minute to really honor the lived experience of people who have neuropathy, because this isn't just a clinical term to throw out. It affects every part of someone's life. And I hear things from people like, I can't walk without pain, or that they're really having trouble going to sleep because the feet burn worse at night, or they're just so irritating at night that they can't get a good night's sleep, or that they feel like they're walking on little rocks or pebbles, or people are scared that they're going to lose their balance because they can't really feel their feet, and it freaks them out and makes them scared to have like a better gait, a better way of walking, or that they miss going on long walks with their dog or with their spouse, or worse, that every single step hurts. And that pain, fear, unpredictability, the feeling of your body not behaving in the way that you want it to, it happens on top of the day-to-day emotional load of living with diabetes itself. The being tired of taking shots, feeling like it's useless, having the joy taken out of food, affecting sexual function. These are all things that people feel ashamed to say out loud, but it is their very real lived experience. And neuropathy brings its own kind of pain, and diabetes its own kind of fatigue, and together they create this next level suffering that people unfortunately often face alone. And I really want to say that you're not alone. You're not imagining it, and none of this is your fault. And many people I talk to feel like they don't know what to eat, and they don't want to lose their independence. That one is one I hear very, very often about. I'm getting into a certain age and I've always been the caretaker. I don't want anybody to have to care for me. And this deserves to be acknowledged and have answers. So, I want to tell a story now. There was someone that I talked to once who had agreed to share his story. So I asked him some questions about his experience with diabetic neuropathy gone into a really bad place, amputation. So I talked to him. He ran his own construction business, and he told me he planned on working all of his days. Like, he loved his work. It gave him a sense of pride and purpose. And then one day on a job site, he stepped wrong off of a concrete slab, maybe, like a foot, 2 foot, not too far down. And he thought nothing of it because it didn't hurt that badly at the time. But then the next day, which was a Friday, he woke up with a sore ankle. And he told me he thought he would just rest it and go to the doctor on Monday, see how it went. And then on Sunday, so we're saying 3 days after he stepped off the slab wrong, he couldn't put his boot on, and he knew, like, this is some intense swelling. So not Sunday, but the next morning he went to the emergency room and was then admitted to the hospital with gas gangrene in his bone. And he tells the story of having his leg amputated below the knee, and then I don't know if it was a few days to a week later, I'm not sure, then above the knee. And after the above knee amputation, he said the doctor said to him, in 8 hours, you would have been dead. The infection was on its way to your heart. And so I asked him, if you could tell someone else with neuropathy or somebody else with diabetes, like what message would you want to share with others about your experience? And he said, if a doctor told you to amputate, don't wait. And while I appreciate that share, and I understand why he shared that in the moment, what I asked him after that was about any foot issues he may have had before that incident, because it's one thing, when things are really bad, if a doctor tells you to amputate, don't wait. But I'm more interested in, like, how did we get here? How did we get to the train wreck? Not about the train wreck itself. And so I asked him about any foot issues he may have had before the incident, and he shared that many years prior to that, he had a blister from an improperly worn Dr. Scholl's type shoe insert. And he says the podiatrist cut away at it, and it got bigger, and cut again, it got bigger. And he said it took 5 years to heal. And at that time, the doctor recommended a foot amputation when he had that non-healing wound on his foot. But then eventually it did close up, and he thought it was healed. Mm-hmm. And this brings me to the very important point that with neuropathy, you don't always feel the severity. And for this gentleman, within days, the swelling, the infection grew. And by the time he sought care, the already compromised tissue, and this is what I see all the time, is people think it's that one, I fell off the concrete slab, but that is not where it all began. It all began back 5 years ago with that rubbing of the foot that caused the ulcer that then caused some damage to be done.
Yeah, we talked about that, I think, extensively in the Charcot episode about how just that chronic inflammation in the lower limbs can really, really degrade a lot of that bone tissue, a lot of that connective tissue.
Mm-hmm. And that infection was there, and then eventually he had to have a higher up amputation to remove all of that damaged tissue, and it could have cost him even more than his leg. But it's really important to understand that all of that happened to him, it was not because he did something wrong, and not because he ignored a problem. He went to the podiatrist. He went to, he thought it was a strained ankle. I know we can all think of a time when we tweaked something a little wrong and we're just like rest, ice, elevate, compress, We don't think that this could lead to something as severe as an amputated leg. And most of the time it doesn't, But I mean, he was doing what he did at work probably 1,000 times before.
Yeah, construction sites, not level ground. He's probably, moving over obstacles and hopping out of trucks on a daily basis.
So it was really that the neuropathy just took away all of the early warning signs. Like anyone else without neuropathy would be like, my foot is throbbing, my foot is killing me, and we would go have something done. Maybe it would need a cast or need, and our body would heal it.
To get me even back to the truck, and somebody's going to take me to the ER right away.
Right.
As opposed to.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so that leads to a not fun, but very important truth, which is that diabetes is the number one cause of non-accidental, non-military, in a war battle zone, amputations in the United States. So it's not car accidents, it's not workplace injuries, but diabetes, specifically neuropathy plus poor circulation plus unnoticed injuries or unnoticed foot ulcers, any of the damages that you could have to the lower extremities on your body. So this is really, again, not about blame. It is about biology, because neuropathy removes the alarm system, and microvascular damage removes the repair team. High glucose weakens the immune system. So high glucose over time weakens the immune system, and inflammation slows the cleanup crew. So even these seemingly small injuries can escalate really quickly. So I want to take a moment to go back to this gentleman's podiatry visit years early and dive into something I've heard dozens of people say to me, which is, I went to the podiatrist, he cut into my foot, and then I lost my toe. Or he did some kind of removal of, did a debridement, lost it. It's very common to hear that. But what is actually happening is not that the podiatrist caused the problem, but they revealed the problem that was already there, because neuropathy, again, it hides the pain. It hides pressure. It hides early infection and tissue breakdown, because a callus on top can hide a very deep ulcer underneath, so that when the podiatrist debrides it, which is just removal of dead tissue, that the true severity that's underneath becomes visible. And so I can understand how somebody might feel that it feels to them that the podiatrist caused it, but they actually uncovered it.
So what, I guess in the moment is the doctor made it worse, is actually the doctor actually exposed what was really going on underneath the skin.
Yep, because that trouble started long before the appointment. And even when we were hearing Wayne's story about Charcot foot, upon further questioning, then we learned about stepping on the cord in the garage years before. So let's balance this not real fun story and not real fun stuff with a story of hope, because I know another gentleman who noticed a tiny dark spot underneath the callus, didn't feel it, but he saw it, and he went in early. The podiatrist removed it. No infection, no tissue loss. He worked on, eating better, increasing fiber, more fruits and vegetables, and improving his blood sugar control. And over months, his nerve systems improved.
So this, much like, I guess, everything else, is really the sooner you can act to improve, the better your
Absolutely. So it's not just like going to the podiatrist and getting that spot debrided. It's changing the actions that led to higher sugar. And maybe not even the actions, but like if you need medication, taking your medication, if you need to move more, doing that, all those things matter and add up. And most amputations are preventable. Not saying that we're blaming anyone with amputations, but most of them are preventable if you know some simple habits to do. Number one, look at your feet daily. Examine them. Like, I don't look at my feet daily. I mean, maybe passively, but I don't examine them with my eyeballs daily. That would definitely be a habit, to kind of like flossing, to look at your feet.
Yeah.
Daily. And I'm thinking about flexibility issues with being able to look at their feet. And a lot of people live alone because their spouses have passed away, or maybe some people aren't married. Or maybe their spouse's eyesight is just as bad as theirs, or flexibility. So it's hard. It's not always that easy, but using mirrors, magnifying glasses, whatever it takes, look at your feet every day. And then moisturize, but there is some nuance here, because you want to moisturize the heels, the tops and the bottoms of the feet, but not in between the toes, because that in between the toe moisture could create more of a fungal growth as well. And it could just get too wet and be even more prone to a nick or a cut or something like that. So a thin layer of lotion, and let it dry before putting on socks and shoes. So absolutely let your feet dry 100% before you move to the next step of socks and shoes. And number 3, wear good shoes.
Yeah, I'm going to need you to clarify a little bit, because there's a whole lot of different types of shoes out there. I have seen, and I believe they're specifically marketed to the diabetic population, these kind of really
population of people with diabetes.
Yes, that these shoes that have a lot of cushioning, real thick.
The Frankenstein shoes.
Yeah, they're I got not to throw any shade. They kind of look like Hoka's. They're very thick.
Shots fired.
Very thick soled, cushiony shoes. Is this what you mean by good shoes?
No. Those are designed for people who already have foot deformities, already have ulcers, or very poor sensation and circulation, or some really high pressure points. So they do serve a purpose for those people in a high risk category. But what I'm really talking about here is shoes that fit well, meaning they don't rub or pinch, they don't press on one spot, and they protect you from getting like debris or stones underneath, like sandals might do, or sharp objects.
So like wide toe box type stuff that's not pinching my feet, stuff that kind of allows my foot to move in the shoe, but not necessarily overly cushiony shoes.
Exactly. Okay. Yep. And if you have a particular shoe that gives you a bad blister every time you wear it, that shoe's got to go. That $40, let's say you spent $60 or $70. Let's say you spent a pretty penny on those shoes. That is not worth a podiatry visit even, let alone if that were to escalate to something worse. So ixnay, bye-bye, get out. Avoid going barefoot outside.
What about barefoot inside?
That's a good question. There are some guidelines and recommendations, but I am...
The only reason I'm asking is I know that you have as much sensory tissue in your hands as you do in your feet.
Mm-hmm.
And, going back to those super cushiony shoes, for the general population, it's better to get some exposure for those feet to actually give the sensory tissue in my feet an opportunity to kind of experience the world around me. But for weighing that against the risk of potentially, I guess if you're outside, the risk of injuring your foot by stepping on something or getting a puncture or something like that. Whereas I believe inside's a relatively controlled environment. Just given the feet opportunity to get some kind of non-damaging sensory input.
Yeah, I personally, that makes sense, but I don't want to go on record saying, I would assume if the guidance is don't avoid going barefoot outside, it just pertains to outside. Okay. I would say you can go barefoot in the house as much as you want. Assuming you're not leaving your needles on the ground in your house or anything crazy like that, which I hope nobody would be doing anyway. So, yeah. So we did some do's. The don'ts were avoid going barefoot outside. Another don't would be do not ignore any kind of discoloration or swelling in the feet. Pay attention to it. See a podiatrist immediately, or go to the ER if it's really really bothersome or really concerning with the look or the way that it presents.
And everything that you just talked about is reasonable to implement. It's not really getting a lot of specialized equipment or anything like that. That's just kind of best daily practices.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's small steps for really big payoff in risk reduction.
As you're saying it, there's the expression, I know it like the back of my hand. It probably, I know it like the bottom of my foot, really getting to be very familiar with your foot health.
Yeah, it's important in diabetes for sure. Yep. So let's shift into some hope, but hope grounded in evidence, not gimmicks, shall we?
Okay.
We know from major research trials that this can all nerve pain, nerve damage can be shifted. So a couple of trials that show this are the UK PDS, which was significant for showing that improved glycemic control reduces neuropathy risk. And then the DCCT, this was people who have type 1 diabetes, but it's still very relevant biology, very translatable study, that the lower the variability in the glucose levels, the lower the neuropathy incidence, even 20 years later.
So this is just more stable or more controlled blood sugars, period, result in less neuropathy, even decades later.
Yep.
Okay.
Then there's Steno 2, which was showing that intensive lifestyle plus metabolic control leads to less neuropathy. Then there's the Look Ahead trial. Diet plus exercise leads to improved nerve function.
And I think that one's significant because everything that you've been talking about is more kind of on the preventative side. This one was actually showing that the some degree of improvement in the nerve performance. So that's very encouraging.
Then there are the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics and the Association of Diabetes Care and Clinical Education Specialist guidelines, which really support sustained, individualized medical nutrition therapy plus physical activity to improve metabolic and neuropathic outcomes. So the nutrition interventions, I'm going to call them
the
the nutrition interventions that help neuropathy based on evidence are high fiber diets, because they improve glucose curves and improve inflammation.
Is there anything fiber can't do?
Right? They can't.
It was a rhetorical question.
Oh,
Fiber's
okay.
awesome. Get more of it in your diet.
Then Mediterranean eating patterns. This is the most studied way of eating in terms of improving cardiovascular outcomes. And so this way of eating has been shown to improve endothelial function, which is the lining on the inside of the blood vessels. And right back to that high fiber diet, bean and lentil based meals can reduce glucose spikes.
So it was around the 46-minute mark that Amber recommended that you eat more beans.
It's always about around that mark that beans enter the podcast. And then reducing ultra processed foods will reduce the inflammatory load, and omega-3 plant sources improve nerve membrane health.
And what are some of omega-3 plant sources?
Those would be your flax seeds, your walnuts. You could also get an omega-3 supplement that's got algae oil. Just make sure it's third-party tested.
And I noticed that none of what you just said was cutting all carbohydrates out of my diet.
Don't recall saying that in the least. No, it's about stabilizing glucose, not annihilating carbs. Some people find that annihilating carbs helps them stabilize glucose because carbohydrates spike the blood, like have the most effect on blood sugar levels. However, when you and we have a whole episode on this, but when you eliminate carbs, your body gets more reactive to the small amount of carbs that you do eat. And so that is a problem in and of itself. Plus, if you eat less carbs, you're eating more fat, you're eating more protein. Yeah. And if you're eating more fat, there's a good chance you could also be eating more saturated fat and more of that artery clogging fat and creating
it's really about
bad cholesterol levels.
The source of the carbohydrates, the quantity in one sitting of the carbohydrates.
Yes, lots of nuance in nutrition. Stuff, so. Yes. Because the carbs, here's the thing. The carbs did not cause neuropathy. The metabolic stress did. And so let's talk about movement interventions that can help nerve healing. You can walk. And if you are not able to walk continuously, you can walk in intervals, especially when, Richie? When's it most beneficial to walk?
Oh, I found this out yesterday after Thanksgiving lunch. Immediately after eating, a walking interval of even 2 to 5 minutes can meaningfully bring that blood glucose back down.
Yep. And how did you know?
How did I know? I happened to be wearing a CGM this week. Amber had one that was about to expire, so we're doing let's see what the guinea pig does under various
Richie,
circumstances.
The guinea pig.
And I found that a walk of about 15 minutes after lunch brought my blood sugar down by about 20 points. So pretty meaningful reduction in a relatively short amount of time.
Mm-hmm. And that is right in line with studies that show about a 20 to 40 point drop in blood sugars with walking post-meal.
Now, we've also talked about, and again, I don't want to give diabetes too much credit, but if I were diabetes and I knew that walking was a meaningful way to really put a damper on my effectiveness, I would try and compromise somebody's feet. I would try and, really reduce their ability.
If diabetes were smart,
really
it would do exactly what it does,
to walk. So what are some non-walking interventions that somebody might try that would help?
Mm-hmm. I know my favorite, besides running, but one that would not be on your feet would be rowing. It's amazing, low impact and nerve blood flow exercise.
And we don't normally do this, but we're going to include a link to how to properly row. As a former U.S. rowing level 1 coach, I feel compelled to help people to not hurt their backs or other stuff when they get on the rowing machine or in a boat. So we'll include a link to that in the show notes.
And if you happen to find yourself on a rowing machine before you watch that video, stop and watch that. Or repeat after me: legs, back, arms. Arms, back, legs.
Just watch the video. It'll be fine. Yeah.
Okay. And then strength training. Strength training is so important, even beyond walking, for nerve communication, nerve innervation. Strength training is really crucial.
And when you say nerve innervation, what exactly do you mean?
I mean nerves going through the muscle to where they are needed to communicate.
Okay.
I don't think I did a good description, but I tried. Balance and proprioception drills. So proprioception is where your body is in space. Where is your foot in relation to things? So I think we have way better proprioception than we give ourselves credit for. And I think anyone who has ever worn a continuous glucose monitor or something such as the Omnipod or other device attached to their body, you really have to wear those suckers on the back of the arm. Maybe it could function just fine on the front or side of the arm, but they were only studied on the back of the arm, I believe, for a reason, because they don't want to replace every other one that they give to somebody. So it's on the back plane of the body instead of sticking out, because you will never fully understand how close you come to door jams when you walk in and out as when you have a device on the outside of your arm, because it will get knocked off, like almost guaranteed. So balance, all that to say, balance and proprioception drills are very important. And then and a lot of people think it has to be this big event, to go outside and schedule this time. And I'm so guilty of this. Like, I've got to have my workout time set aside, but it's also important to have like these movement snacks throughout the day. If you think of it like a meal, if you have a big supper, you might also have a snack, and the same thing with movement. If you have this big movement event, you might also have snack movement. So even 5 minutes at a time can improve those tiny capillaries. It can improve the flow. It can improve the flow of lymph, all of the conduction and microvascular flow. So when blood sugar stabilizes and the metabolic inflammation decreases, nerves are going to get better oxygen. Endothelial, that's the function of the artery and blood vessel walls, is going to improve. Oxidative stress decreases and the mitochondria work more effectively. So early neuropathy is reversible. Later neuropathy is able to be slowed down, and all neuropathy is influenceable through nutrition, exercise, movement, doing all of the foot care tips that we talked about.
So we can't make you 20 years old again, but we can certainly make whatever you're experiencing right now better.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's the goal, always. So let's talk a little bit about medication. I know we're getting towards the end here, but I do want to talk about some tools, not necessarily cures, but if we're talking about neuropathy, I think you do want to talk about two categories of medications that could be helpful. So we've got symptom reducers, and then we have medications that could work on your metabolism. And those would be like your more historic diabetes meds that you would think of. So the symptom reducers are going to help with the pain, but they're not going to fix the root of that pain. And those would be gabapentin, pregabalin, duloxetine, tricyclic antidepressants, and capsaicin patches. And then your metabolic medications would be medications that most people who have diabetes and have taken some medication for diabetes are familiar with. And so these help with the cause of the high sugars, like your glucagon-like peptide 1 receptor agonists, your Ozempics, Mounjaros, tirzepatide, Zepbound, Victoza, Bydureons of the world. And then the SGLT2 receptor inhibitors, those are working on the sodium renal glucose transport system. And then metformin, your PPAR gamma receptors. So, yeah.
So just like everything else, and I think we said it a bunch, the medication can help.
That's the scaffolding.
Can reduce maybe the severity of some of the experience, but it absolutely is not a magic bullet. It is not going to move this thing in a better direction long term.
It can move things in a better direction, but eventually, yes, you typically would need more medication added, all things remaining the same. So yes, if we support remission, we support dietary and nutrition changes
without the lifestyle
changes,
yes. Without the changes to the inputs coming in and the volume of movement supporting the muscle tissue and the nervous tissue.
These are helpful. They are supportive. They are not curative. I think that's where you were really getting at, is it's not going to
have to do
it.
something besides taking the medication.
Because
or
that
in addition to, I should say.
Right. Because we're really trying to inspire people to have better nutrition through more fruits and vegetables, increased fiber, less ultra-processed foods, more movement through walking, short movement snacks, especially walking after meals, lifting weights, finding a way to do that feels safe to people. Weight loss if necessary, 5 to 10% of weight loss if you are overweight can have huge implications for diabetes, blood sugar outcomes, and using diabetes remission tools, all these things that we've talked about. And ideally from that, you would have lower glucose variability, less high highs, less low lows, and lower inflammation. And so how you improve neuropathy, like real answers, what actually works, evidence-based, is getting the post-meal glucose between 140 to 160, which is not really, like the endocrinologist would tell you, post-meal blood sugar under 140, and because you're going to have improved outcomes. But if your post-meal blood sugar right now is always at 180 or 200, then you want to get it down.
Would be an improvement. Yeah. So.
The reducing the variability, stabilizing any spikes from meals, which might look like you having protein first, non-starchy vegetables first, and then your carbohydrates, or eating more frequently. It's just very individualized for the person. Increase fiber probably dramatically, because the average American gets 15 grams a day and we're asking you to get 25 to 40 grams. So by dramatically, I don't mean 0 to 30 overnight,
Double it.
Yeah. But begin to incorporate things like beans, lentils, chia seeds, oats, berries. Fiber can really smooth those glucose curves, and smoother curves equals calmer nerves.
Oh, yeah.
And add in these little movement snacks, 5 minutes after meals, walking upstairs, marching in place, rowing on an ergometer. It's probably not realistic for you to go grab a boat and get in water rowing, but
if you have access to it, get on it. It's wonderful.
Yoga flows would be nice if they're able, especially if they're able to reduce anxiety, reduce stress, because that can reduce inflammation. Reduce those major inflammatory drivers, which would be ultra-processed foods, sugary beverages, foods with hydrogenated oils, especially excessive saturated fat, any sedentary streaks. Like if a lot of people might be decently active and then injure themselves, and then they do nothing for weeks, and those can be very detrimental to your health. Sleep 7 to 9 hours a night. Repairing hormones are peaking at night, and so that's why it's really important for your body to be able to repair itself, because nerves need restoration. We talked about weight loss. Any excess body fat loss can improve nerve function, and we really want you to hopefully see remission as another pathway to not have neuropathy, because you're going to have reduced pain, improved sensation, better balance, and better sexual function if you're able to do that. So I'm just going to share one last real person's experience. This person came to me exhausted. She could barely walk out to the mailbox, and her feet burned every night. And in our first talk, she said, well, I guess this is my life now. But no, it was not her fate. We stabilized her glucose. We added fiber. We reduced the ultra-processed foods in her diet. We got her walking at least 5 minutes after a meal, and then going to water aerobics. And then it's just building upon healthy habits to build her metabolic momentum and stabilize her glucose. And she was able to come off of insulin. Her A1C, while coming off insulin, went down 1 percentage point in less than 3 months. And so within 10 weeks, her night pain decreased 60%. The tingling reduced. She slept better, and her mood lifted. And then at 6 months, the burning pain she was feeling was gone. She regained sensation, and more importantly, she felt hopeful again. This is possible. It's not guaranteed, but absolutely, undeniably possible.
Okay. And I think that's about it for this episode.
That was a lot.
It was a lot.
As usual.
This is a good one, because a lot of people, I certainly have not heard about it as much as you have, but even in my experience, is pretty common.
Mm-hmm.
Particularly with the feet,
Mm-hmm.
and knowing that this is not the new norm. This is not just a forever thing, that you can actually make this better.
And this is the one that people get, and then they say, nobody ever told me.
Yeah.
Why did nobody ever tell me that this was a part of diabetes, that this could happen?
Yeah.
We're telling you.
When stuff starts getting cut off, it gets real quick. This goes from being kick it down the road to you can't.
But hopefully that's not, even though it can happen, we want to prevent that. And hopefully there are things in here that someone listening, and the great thing, one of my mentors used to say, is that When prevention is successful, how do you know? Because nothing happens, which is beautiful. You can only compare different groups over time. But yeah, I hope nothing happens to you.
And on that note, thank you for listening to the Diabetes Podcast, and we will talk to you again next week.
May you have an uneventful time.
May nothing happen.
Meaning nothing happened.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Diabetes Podcast. We hope this episode helped you. And if you know someone struggling with diabetic neuropathy, please share this with them. If you enjoyed this episode, please take the time to give it a like and leave it a review. This really helps to promote and sustain this free podcast and get the word out to the millions of people struggling with type 2 and prediabetes, letting them know that remission is possible if you take action today. And if you have additional questions or need additional support, reach out to us at support@empowerdiabetes.com. Until next time, take courage. You can do this, and we can help.